We're rolling. All right, welcome to the Natural Healing Study Group, Tuberose Healing. And today, I think we have some interesting topics. We want to talk about quite a few things, but zero it in on respiratory and electromagnetic. So we want to talk about some of the true causes of flu, where it really came from, and how it originally was an electromagnetic disturbance, and then how it kind of moved into more of a respiratory situation. Explain a little bit about what this is. You know, everybody thinks that it's an electromagnet, a microorganism, but we want to take in a little bit different place today and talk about a little different side of the flu or influenza, where it came from, and its association with, again, electromagnetic phenomena. And then we'll take you over into dealing with respiratory conditions and some different herb supplements and things, treatments that we can do to help when we have weakened respiratory system or weakened mucous membranes, weakened sinuses, coughing, the different things that happen in our respiratory system, and some ways to get around that. So hope you enjoy this, and I'm going to hand it over to Bobby. I think you've got some stuff lined up, and then I've got something when you're done. And
just want to update you real quick on, can you see our Tuberose Healing page?
Yes, and if you could talk a little louder into your microphone or move it a little closer.
Just want to update you, if you go to our website, tuberosehealing.com, and you scroll down on the home page, you'll see the virus Schmirus icon. If you click on that, it'll take you to this page, and on top we have a lot of PDF files that you can download. This is I've been working on these the last couple of weeks, concentrating information. There's some text here, the overview of what's going on, and then if you get to the bottom, we got some good videos that are, some of them you can't see
The name
online anymore because they're banned, but we've got them on our website, so you can watch them and refer people to them. And again, we'll be updating this regularly, but soon we'll be updating this drastically. Right now we're discovering a hidden, to me, aspect of influenza, and I want to talk a little bit about the history of it today, but it explains so much about what we're seeing going on right now and the true origins of pandemics, influenza. And then if you want to find out what a virus really is, you want to read these PDFs, COVID-19 umbrella term, what if COVID has nothing at all to do with the virus, germ theory of disease causation, the germ theory versus terrain theory, and then information about wearing masks and, you know, differences and what it does to the body and stuff. And then we just recently did a video that I think we posted where we tested a patient on the table, showing that covering the mouth will weaken the whole body with a mask or anything. Actually, we found after, even your own hand, you don't even have to touch the body, and it causes every muscle. It upsets the autonomic regulation of the whole body, and so it affects the mitochondria and weakens every muscle in the body. So just having your face covered like that, not even talking about breathing and you know, gas pressures and things like that, just the actual fact of covering that oral cavity weakens the body. So we did a little video demonstrating that, and I think you'll find that interesting. But the history of influenza, 1889. I'm still compiling this information, and I'll put it in a handout and then a PowerPoint and then eventually make a video out of it. But it's pretty powerful information, and I was blown away. But 1889 is the year man-made electrical disturbances of the Earth's atmosphere took on a global character. In that year, the Edison General Electric Company was incorporated, and Westinghouse Electric Company was reorganized as the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company. In that year, Westinghouse acquired Tesla's alternating current patents and put them to use in its generating stations, which grew to 150 in number in 1889. This was 10 years after the electric light was invented. And it grew to 301 in 1890, the next year. And in the United Kingdom, the amendment of the Electric Lighting Act in 1888 eased regulations on the electric power industry and made central power station development commercially feasible for the first time. And in 1889, 61 producers in 10 countries were manufacturing incandescent lamps. And American and European companies were installing power plants in Central and South America. So in 1889, most historians agree the modern electrical era opened. And in 1889, doctors in the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia were overwhelmed by a flood of critically ill patients suffering from a strange disease that many of these doctors had never seen before. And that disease was influenza. And that pandemic lasted 4 continuous years and killed at least 1 million people. So influenza is an electrical disease. Suddenly and inexplicably, influenza, whose descriptions had remained consistent for thousands of years, changed its character in 1889. Flu had last seized most of England in November 1847, over half a century earlier. The last flu epidemic in the United States had raged in the winter of 1874 and 1875. Since ancient times, influenza has been known as a capricious, unpredictable disease. A wild animal that came from nowhere, terrorized whole populations at once, without warning and without a schedule, and disappeared as suddenly and mysteriously as it arrived, not to be seen again for years or decades. It behaved unlike any other illness. It was thought not to be contagious and received its name because its coming and goings were said to be governed by the influence of the stars. But in 1889, influenza was tamed. From that year forward, it would always be present in every part of the world. It would vanish mysteriously as before, but it could be counted on to return at more or less the same time the following year. And it's never been absent since 1889, when we electrified our world. So like anxiety disorder, influenza is so common and so seemingly familiar that a thorough review of its history is necessary to unmask this stranger and convey the enormity of the public health disaster that occurred 130 years ago. The microscopic virus associated with this disease has been so exhaustively studied that scientists know more about its tiny life cycle than about any other single microorganism. But this has been a reason to ignore many unusual facts about this disease, including the fact that it is not contagious. For at least the last 3 centuries, influenza pandemics have been most likely to occur during peaks of solar magnetic activity at the height of each 11-year cycle. So this is before the power grid and before we were electrified. This was happening, but it wasn't in a predictable pattern. Early on, virologists knew that influenza did not support a mode of transmission by direct human-to-human contact. Why is influenza seasonal? Why is influenza almost completely absent except during the few weeks or months of an epidemic? Why do flu epidemics end? Why don't out-of-season epidemics spread? How do epidemics explode over whole countries at once and disappear just as miraculously as if suddenly prohibited? Why does flu so often target young adults and spare infants and the elderly? How is it possible that flu epidemics traveled at the same blinding speed in past centuries as they do today? How does the virus accomplish its so-called vanishing trick? When a new strain of the virus appears, the old strain between one season and the next vanishes completely, all over the world at once. In the past, influenza pandemics tended to occur during years of maximum solar activity, and the yearly number of cases of flu in Denmark rose and fell with the number of sunspots. One Danish physician was certain that influenza had something to do with electricity. In 1904 and 1905, he kept a careful diary of his health for 9 months and later compared it to records of the electrical potential of the atmosphere, which he had recorded 3 times a day for 10 years. It turned out that his incapacitating migraine headaches, which he had always known were connected to changes in the weather, almost always fell on the day of or one day before a sudden severe rise or drop in the value of atmospheric voltage. On the days of such electrical turmoil, almost without exception, his sleep was broken and unrestful, and he was bothered with dizziness, irritable mood, a feeling of confusion, buzzing sensation in his head, pressure in his chest, and an irregular heartbeat. And sometimes he wrote, "My condition had the character of a threatening influenza attack." Many others have connected influenza with sunspots or atmospheric electricity. In 1836, Heinrich Schleich observed that all physiological processes produce electricity and proposed that an electrical disturbance of the atmosphere may prevent the body from discharging. He believed that the accumulation of electricity within the body causes the symptoms of influenza. No one has yet disproven this. Between 1645 and 1715, a period astronomers call the Maunder minimum, when the sun was so quiet that virtually no sunspots were to be seen and no auroras graced polar nights. There were also no worldwide pandemics of flu between 1645 and 1715. It wasn't until 1727 that the sunspot number surpassed 100 for the first time in over a century. And in 1728, influenza arrived in waves over the surface of the earth, the first flu pandemic in also almost 150 years. That pandemic appeared on every continent, became more violent in 1732, and lasted until 1738, the peak of the next solar cycle. And then there were reports of madness among dogs. Horses were seized with catarrh before some birds, particularly sparrows, left the places where people were sick. Some people had sickness for 60 continuous days, and others not sick died suddenly. It was estimated that some 2 million people worldwide perished in that pandemic. And if influenza is primarily an electrical disease, a response to an electrical disturbance of the atmosphere, then it's not contagious in the ordinary sense. The deadly 1889 pandemic began in a number of widely scattered parts of the world. Severe outbreaks were reported in May of that year simultaneously in Bukhara, Uzbekistan, Greenland, and northern Alberta. Flu was reported in Philadelphia and in Hillston, a remote town in Australia, and in August in the Balkans. Many historians pretend that the 1889 pandemic didn't really start until it had seized the western steppes of Siberia at the end of September, and that it then spread in an orderly fashion from there outward throughout the rest of the world, person to person by contagion. But the trouble is that the disease still would have had to travel faster than the trains and ships of the time. It reached Moscow and St. Petersburg during the 3rd or 4th week of October, but by then, influenza had already been reported in Durban, South Africa, and Edinburgh, Scotland. New Brunswick, Canada, Cairo, Paris, Berlin, and Jamaica were reporting epidemics in November. London, Ontario on December 4th, Stockholm on December 9th, New York on December 11th, Rome on December 12th, Madrid on December 13th, and Belgrade on December 15th. Influenza struck explosively and unpredictably over and over in waves until early 1894. It was as if something fundamental had changed in the atmosphere, as if brush fires were being ignited by some unknown vandal randomly everywhere in the world.
Hey, Bobby, can I ask you a quick question
Yeah.
while you're there? Maybe just describe a little bit, what was that like, 1889, 1890? Was there electricity? Was there light bulbs? Was there, people may not know exactly right around that time what was going on.
Well, 1889 is when the historians say that our planet became electrified.
So there's electricity, and then it started to then
There
go.
were electric rails, and that grew in number. So you had electrified railroad tracks, kind of like antennas. You had
like trolley cars, and
you had the grid system starting to grow in cities. Wires running everywhere.
so we had some really faulty, and a lot of it, like a lot of wires, like kind of how some third world places are now, so where you see this intense wires and everything hooked up and like extension cords and stuff all
Right.
over.
Yeah.
Unshielded, ungrounded, probably. So to just get everybody in their mind, all of a sudden, like, this is happening, right? All over the world, we're getting this kind of wonky electrical grid set up. Okay.
So influenza struck explosively, unpredictably over and over in waves until early 1894 in East Central Africa. Influenza spread like a flood, inundating whole sections in an hour. It's scarcely conceivable that a disease which spreads with such astonishing rapidity goes through the process of redevelopment in each person infected and is only communicated from person to person or by infected articles. So influenza works its caprice not only on land, but at sea. With today's speed of travel, this is no longer obvious, but in previous centuries, when sailors were attacked with influenza weeks or even months out of their last port of call, it was something to remember. There were reports of at least 15 separate historical instances where entire ships, or even many ships in a naval fleet, were seized by the illness far from landfall, as if they had sailed into an influenza fog, only to discover in some cases upon arriving at the next port that influenza had broken out on land at the same time. So the speed at which influenza travels and its random and simultaneous pattern of spread has perplexed scientists for centuries and has been the most compelling reason for some to continue to suspect atmospheric electricity is the cause, despite the known presence of an extensively studied virus. So no disease has ever been observed to affect so many people in so short a time as the influenza. Almost whole city, town, or neighborhood becoming affected in a few days, indeed much sooner than could be supposed to spread by contagion.
Okay, so just to paraphrase that,
Yeah.
it spread so fast and it jumped continents before ships could even go take people around. So that phenomena could not be an actual communicable spread from person to person. This is what you're saying. It's like it spread, boom. It's like all of a sudden it's over there. Like you said, it was already in port before the ship got there that had people that would have carried it. So,
Right.
so we're starting to see a massive amount of electrical grid being put up. And then we start to see a massive outbreak of this flu-like symptom. And then Bobby mentioned before that, he mentioned before there was that they started to notice hit and miss these symptoms with sunspot activity or other electromagnetic phenomena. Just to paraphrase what you're saying, right?
Right. So usually influenza travels at the same speed as man, but at times it apparently breaks out simultaneously in widely separated parts of the globe. So before 1918, there are records of 2 other major epidemics of influenza in North America during the past 2 centuries. The first of these occurred in 1789 the year in which George Washington was inaugurated president. The first steamboat didn't cross the Atlantic until 1819, and the first steam train did not run until 1830. Thus, this outbreak occurred when man's fastest conveyance was the galloping horse. So this
For
couldn't have
fast
spread,
horses.
it couldn't have spread by contagion. And so I think it gets into how insane asylums, in the
Early
initial
1900s.
initial symptoms manifested were not respiratory; they were neurologic.
So people
And,
started freaking out, basically. They went mad. He's gone mad.
Nearly a quarter of the 41,500 cases of flu reported in Pennsylvania on May 1st, 1890 were classified as primarily neurological, not respiratory. And few patients in London had respiratory symptoms. Instead, they had dizziness, insomnia, indigestion, constipation, vomiting, diarrhea, utter prostration of mental and bodily strength, neuralgia, delirium, coma, and convulsions. Upon recovery, many were left with neurasthenia or even paralysis or epilepsy. So no epidemic of any disease on record has had such mental effects. It's mostly respiratory symptoms of people.
So it
Now,
started to affect people.
I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but in 1918, the Spanish flu, that happened right when they introduced radar in the world. And so that was a whole new influence. The radar travels pretty far. And the more of these stations that there are, there's radar constantly. We're being, like, just from the
Doppler radar.
down in Pinellas Park there, we're getting hit every, once a minute or something with that alone.
And everybody has
environment,
weather radar wherever they live. There's weather radar, Doppler radars.
Our environment is being saturated with this stuff where it wasn't before. So it makes more sense that things like that, because before we were electrified, influenza only showed up sporadically, randomly, and at 1889, that's when it started showing up every year, and it still does.
And that's when we started to really implement the power grid.
Right.
Okay, so that was kind of like the first thing that happened. And then the Spanish flu in 1918 is when we started to put up radar, which was even more intense, frying of the atmosphere. That was in the early 1900s. I remember recently a video went around by a Dr. Thomas Cohen that you guys, Cohen, can look him up. And he talked exactly about that. And he's the one that kind of started to talk about the exosomes and that the virus and that pandemic of the 1918, the Spanish flu, and radar.
So let's move ahead to the future, to now, with this supposed, I call it plandemic, and the introduction of 5G everywhere. And we've been over that, the correlation of the cities that had, in countries that had the highest reported incidence of sick people, and symptoms were the same as that of microwave sickness, flu-like symptoms.
So Wuhan was one of
that's where they were introducing 5G, and
in Wuhan was the nastiest, dirtiest, chemically polluted cities there. And then what was it, Lombardy, Italy, another nasty air pollution, 5G on board place.
So, and then if we go further down the rabbit hole, you'll find out there is a condition of blood clotting, micro clotting. It's called disseminated intravascular coagulation that happens in people's bodies. And you can't can't tell this unless you do autopsy with microscopic tissue examination. But that's what's causing most likely causing the people to just drop all of a sudden, because their blood coagulates and they can't deliver. It's not that they're not able to breathe, okay, but they can't get oxygen to the tissues where it's needed because the blood vessels are obstructed with coagulated blood clots. So people just drop like flies, and that's one of the symptoms of microwave poisoning. So I'm looking forward to getting through this and getting it in a more palatable form, like a PowerPoint or video. But
So yeah, this is a lot of information.
For people to correlate that this isn't communicable, wearing a mask isn't going to make any difference at all. And so
we're really starting to get our heads around this being an electromagnetic phenomenon, right, and how it's being pushed down our throats to comply, to give up our rights. Has things gotten any better since 9/11? Let me ask everybody that one. Is it easier to fly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, know the law. According to social distancing, shop staff, like in the stores and stuff, cannot touch you or come within 1 meter without breaking guidelines. Of course, they touch everything you're buying, and if you refuse to wear a mask in their shop, they cannot physically throw you out. They can't commit battery on you. You can only call the police to enforce a government guideline. The big problem for the police is that would be breaking the law if they try to enforce a guideline, because police can only legally enforce criminal law. If the police detain you or arrest you because naturally you have refused to cooperate, they are then guilty of unlawful detention, which comes under the criminal code of kidnapping. If they try to fine you first, without first kidnapping you, you're not obliged to give them any information, not even your name. Without your name, they cannot issue a fine. If they find out your name by whatever means and then issue a fine, you can simply state that you refuse to accept or pay any fine. They will be obliged to caution you, which would be totally illegal since you will not have committed any crime. And again, that would not be enforcing any law. So you got to know the difference. Guidelines come under civil law and crimes come under criminal law. Police are not allowed to enforce civil law. Only the local authority and the civil courts can attempt to do that. So demand that the court issue you with a date for an appearance, and when and if you go to court, your defense will be illegal detention and kidnapping. And in the civil court, you'll be able to demand substantial compensation as a counterclaim from the police, plus insist that criminal charges are brought against the arresting and detaining officers. So ensure that you use your phone and record the whole event to be used as leverage and evidence. But just remember this one fact: the police cannot enforce civil law and therefore have no rights in determining whether or not you have to wear a mask just because the government says so. That would be called a dictatorship. We're not quite there yet, despite the government's attempts to make it so. So there is no distinctive COVID-19 virus in evidence. It's never been isolated and purified. So there's no proof of any viral COVID-19 disease either. So COVID-19 has not been isolated, which means that all the COVID-19 response is fraudulent. COVID-19 testing is fraud, media hype, it's just propaganda. And the daily press briefings by the health officers are fraudulent. If the virus has not been isolated, then what are they testing for? What are they pretending to diagnose? What are they pretending to cure? What are they making a vaccine for? And what are they pretending to prevent through mandatory masks? Now here is a Florida statute. There's probably one in every state if you look it up. And this is 2011 Florida statutes. And Title 46, Chapter 876, Section 12, No person or persons over the age of 16 shall, while wearing any kind of mask, hood, or device whereby, let's see, any portion of the face is so hidden, concealed, or covered as to conceal the identity of the wearer, enter upon or be or appear upon any lane, walk, alley, street, road, highway, or other public way in this state. That was law from 1951, the year I was born. So it's against the law to cover your face in public. So you're breaking the law by doing that. And if you have a concealed carry permit, you're violating the guidelines of that permit as well. You can't obstruct your face, your identity when you're concealed carrying. So atmospheric oxygen is being denatured by microwave transmissions from all these cell towers, 5G and everything. And the amount of atmospheric oxygen has been depleted from 21% in 1950 to 16% now in some cities. That's 5% in 50 years versus 8% total since 250,000 BC. So you're starving for oxygen on a daily basis, and now you're going to put a mask on and further deplete your ability to breathe. So the idiots in charge of the military created a monster vaccine and deployed it through the military during the Second Iraqi War. It was a vaccination that caused the victims to develop supercoagulation syndrome, also known as thick blood disease. A whole generation of second-round Iraqi vets are battling this disease and being forced to take warfarin, or rat poison, to thin their blood enough to survive. And even their families are developing the same symptoms. So there's a link, you can go for an official explanation of coagulation disease. But this is the real problem is reduced atmospheric oxygen. And it's just getting worse. It's made worse quickly by pollution of the oceans, deforestation, and the broadcast microwave technology. So that, along with the coagulation disease that's being reported by exposure to 5G, we have big problems with that. So coronavirus, by definition, is a piece of RNA wrapped in a fatty protein coat that melts at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Melts, self-destructs. So with temperatures in Texas in excess of 100 degrees Fahrenheit for days at a time, how is it possible that COVID-19 cases are skyrocketing?
In Florida too.
Not likely, is it? If Texans, Californians, Arizonans, New Mexicans, Floridians just let nature take its course and shut down their air conditioning to a cozy 80 degrees Fahrenheit, they'd cook every coronavirus, including the purely legendary COVID-19. It's precisely this phenomena that accounts for seasonal flu. People get colds and flu in the fall and winter. We've been over this, how right after Halloween, people start getting sick, eating all that candy and stuff. And then the big overcooked meals with Thanksgiving dinner and a week of leftovers, and then Christmas partying, and then Christmas dinner and all the cookies and candies and the stress of buying and shopping and all that. And then we have New Year's partying and another big meal and leftovers. People are, in addition to the seasonal change in the, from climate change, and especially if you live up north of 20 degrees or 30 degrees actually of latitude, where the sun is, the angle is more critical and you don't get the ultraviolet A and things. So that's being manifested, and everybody's exposed to the electrification. And then now they're carrying microwave transmitters on them in their pockets, hanging on their belts and stuff, and Bluetooth in their car, and Wi-Fi routers in their houses and where they work, and they're just exposed to this, and the artificial light, all of it. So that's creating damage to the cells of the body. And it's the damaged cells that, when they replace the damaged components, or they go through what's called autophagy, and the turnover of cells. They excrete the damaged parts that go out into the extracellular matrix, the extracellular fluid around the cells. And there's some in the cells also. And when scientists see this under scanning electron microscope that's been frozen and sliced, and they see these chains of protein, they call it a virus. But it really comes from the cells themselves, the injured, damaged cells, and the body's repairing and excreting. And then, so you're going to find these in people's bodies because they're all exposed to these same influences and the same kind of damage being done. So their thinking is like, you see flies and maggots and garbage, that means they cause the garbage, or mosquitoes cause stagnant water, or firemen, you always see firemen at burning buildings, so they must have caused it. You always see cholesterol in arterial plaquing, that must have caused the plaquing. You know, it's that kind of thinking. So it's, when you get the whole picture, then it makes a lot more sense to what's really causing this, and it's not communicable. Wearing a mask is not going to help. So it's going to make it worse.
Spread the word.
And yeah, so I want to find real quick a video.
Want me to share this while you get that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. Let me show something while Bobby's working on that. I want to talk a little bit about respiratory health and things to keep your respiratory strong. Now we know that things weaken us, that you know, we are susceptible to lots of irritants, lots of airborne. I'm always thinking more of indoor pollution than anything else. Yeah, I'm thinking of sick building syndrome. I'm thinking of, you know, you constantly have, you know, we're synthetic environment. We have carpets, we have blinds, we have paint, we have finishes on cabinets, just all of this synthetic building materials, glues, paints, varnishes, on everything that we have. And then on top of that, you know, some environments have more mold than others, and the different times of year and the different buildings, you know, can trap that. We were looking at some recent you know, how they're building houses, and if you're building houses and it's raining, you know, you put, you know, you have that plywood, and then you put the moisture barrier on top of it after it's been raining. You're trapping some of that in, and then it may never get to really dry before you then put insulation and things. So some houses are doomed right from the get-go. So anyway, we're always, I think, fighting respiratory issues, irritants, pollutants, chemtrails. You know, I'd be worried more about chemtrails than anything else. I would wear a mask to protect myself from chemtrails, if anything, but I'm not into that game. But that makes more sense, you know, if they're spraying us with heavy metals. Gosh, there's just so many, you know, different mycotoxins, molds, yeah, just tons of garbage. So that would be much more helpful to filter that out. But there are things that we can do. And I want to show you a couple of the respiratory things and herbs that are around, and different things that you can do to strengthen your mucous membranes, strengthen your epithelial cells in your sinuses, in the bronchioles and the alveoli, you know, in your lung tissue. So there's some really good herbs, and a lot of these grow almost everywhere. This is plantain, and this is a nice thick-leafed one. But they get these familiar spikes on those, and I think most people have seen this in their yards. And different types get even thinner leaves, but it gives it away with these tall, kind of spiky blooms here. So this is a great respiratory herb, very, very useful, and these could be made into teas and tinctures. One of my favorite is mint, and you can grow several varieties of mint: spearmint, peppermint, and there's the menthol is the main component, that the extract in mint. This is so good for respiratory and for digestive symptoms, and all the mint families. And the mint family, it's interesting. You can always tell something from the mint family because it'll have a square stem. The stem on it will be square. So mint, all the mints are great. Wintergreen, another great useful herb. You probably know this with some of the different menthol extracts and Vicks Vapo Rub. I'm going to show you one in a minute, one of my favorite. But wintergreen, you know, I put it in gum and breath, you know, fresheners to freshen the breath. But that's really a good herb for respiratory systems. And this is great. Let me get you this one. In eucalyptus, okay, another one. These have these certain oils in there that facilitate mucous membrane health. And here we go. This one is one of my favorites. I love this. It's called Deep Blue Rub by doTERRA. They have this in a little vial, you know, the essential oil, but I personally like this rub for respiratory complaints more than the oil. For some reason, the way these herbs are into the, you know, the ointment, to me, it's great to just put it on your hands and then smell it like that. Get deep inhale, or have that, you know, if you need to open your sinuses and your respiratory airways, it helps sterilize and clean that out, and it promotes an opening up of the sinuses. You can also put it on a cotton and then just kind of hold it and put it on your nose. It really helps unstuff sinuses and opens up those airways. One of the first things that I would suggest to do. And then this old-fashioned steam breathing with mentholated herbs. You know, you can put a few drops of some menthol or mint or eucalyptus in a bowl of hot tea, and then you put the little drape over your head and you're smelling the vapors. It really is healing. And you can also use colloidal silver in there, which I'll get to in a minute, to add to that. Let's go down here. Now, some of the things that I like for respiratory, and whenever I hear respiratory, I think vitamin A. And, you know, years ago, everybody would get lined up and you get their scoop of vitamin A in the wintertime, you know, because this is much needed to build those respiratory membranes, to build the epithelial cells and tissues of your mucous membranes, because they got a high turnover rate because they're constantly catching irritants and sloughing off, so that mucus layer is got to constantly slough off. Same with this in your stomach. So we need sources of vitamins to mainly vitamin A is the biggest one, to create those cells. Chicken or beef liver, you know, making chopped chicken livers. If you don't like that, learn to like it or get it in another form. But chopped chicken livers are delicious. Other forms, and I personally like the preformed vitamin A. I mean, better, and it seems to work better for people than the vegetable sources, because your body has to convert these, you know, the vegetable sources, not the animal sources.
Beta carotene.
The beta carotene into the vitamin A, where the animal's already done it. Some people just can't do those conversions really well. But anyway.
Can't do it at all.
Yeah. But these are some of the orange vegetables which are high in the beta carotene. And if you have a mix, you get kind of the best of both worlds. So another thing that sometimes bothers mucous membranes and respiratory things are histamine-rich foods. They create inflammation in the respiratory airways, inflammation in the sinuses. And I didn't put a picture of this, but one of the things I really like for this problem, when you get histamine, and that can also be an irritant. If you're a pollen, you know, can an irritant, and then you create histamines. So it's just part of the inflammatory effect, part of the inflammation process. But a substance called quercetin is great for bringing that stuff down quickly, like 500 milligrams several times a day, to bring down that swollen sinuses. Is why, you know, you want to get that taken care of before it continues to make more mucus and go down your throat, and then you start swallowing it, and then you're gonna have to cough it out, and that's when it becomes thicker, and then actual microorganisms can live in it. I mean, they're doing their job, but it's not very fun for you. Here's some histamine stimulating foods. Sometimes when you have a problem with that, you may have to avoid these for a little while till you get on top of it.
Also, foods that you're intolerant to
Exactly.
create histamines because the immunoglobulins build up and accumulate to such a high state that it triggers the mast cells to make more histamines, which
So
are
that's where right. So that's where something like quercetin and then these foods would help to start bringing that down. Another thing I really like is the ultrasonic nebulizer for quickly helping any respiratory symptoms. Here's one type. Here's another type. You don't have to put the little mask on your face. I just wanted this to show you that there's like a fog that comes out, and you can just put your little face right over here and just breathe it. It's plenty in there, and I like people to nebulize colloidal silver. There's a lot of things that you can nebulize, but colloidal silver is one of my favorites. And I just found out some interesting things about colloidal silver, and I posted it on my Facebook page today, an article about this, so it has the references. But there was some people that did some studies and found that people that had, cold or flu symptoms, they did hair analysis on them, and they were low in silver. So people that would take colloidal silver or had more of that in their diet or their bodies had more silver. That it's a conductor, so it's a charge. So it's going to help charge up your whole system. So I thought that was pretty interesting that, people in the same household, some can test low on silver and get those flu-like symptoms by being low in things that held charge in their body. So it may not always be just a microorganism that this silver is doing or that we're trying to fight or be against, but it's an electrical phenomenon. It kind of goes back to what Bobby was saying. If we have all these electromagnetic disturbances and then our own ability to hold charge in our system is disrupted or weakened, then we become symptomatic. So I wanted to just give you some of these things to think about with turning this around.
And then we've talked about grounding, how important that is. And then when you're exposed to these electrical fields that build up static charge in your body, if you're not grounded, you're not in touch with the earth, they can't discharge, you can't leave your body, and that sets you up for a lot of illness symptoms. So being grounded, being in touch with the earth, having ground sheet on your bed, things like that really will help protect you from having these kinds of symptoms.
A little comment here in the chat. I thought the viruses were not able to be transmitted from human being to human being, that they were damaged parts of the cells being excreted by the design of God. They are.
That's what we just said, yeah.
That's it, yeah. And then another thing is, how do human beings get tuberculosis? Is it a lung transmissible from human being to human being?
So there are some things that are communicable, but they don't spread like influenza. That's the thing. There's no contagious condition that spreads as fast as influenza does. And they've seen this throughout, hundreds of years in recorded history.
Now the terrain, though, there was a book several years ago. It's out of print now. If anybody can ever get a copy of it, but we also have some of that information called "The Terrain Is Everything" by Susan Stockton. Used to know her, wonderful person. But she wrote that book and did a lot of research on the terrain. And if we're talking about communicating something, then the terrain has to be right for something to grow and live in. If the condition is acidic enough and the mucus is thick enough, then yeah, that's a great petri dish for microorganisms to live in. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I can answer that one. If if it's really transmissible or if it's a condition of the environment being receptive to the environment. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going, Mink, how would you use the leaves exactly? I would use the leaves as tea. And then if you have so many of them, you know, you can dry them and keep them. And if you get so many of them, you can dry them and then tincture them, pour vodka over it and extract it with the vodka. But
Right.
if you, the leaves and mint, I would just keep them around for tea or for breathing, you know, like that little tent thing I showed you. Yeah.
I want to show you one more thing. This is a little video we did in the clinic. And years ago, we studied Dietrich Klinghart's autonomic response testing. And one of the parameters that he teaches is to check autonomic regulation. And one of the ways you do that is you cover either the mouth or the over the umbilicus. And the person, if their regulation is open, it should make them go weak. Research clinic. I want to demonstrate for you today how wearing a face mask or covering your face, your mouth especially, with anything will weaken your whole body. So we've got Vicky here on the table. We're going to check her arm strength. A little strong? She's really strong. A little strong. You can see she's grounded down here electrically. Got a ground strap on her. So she's really good and strong. Now I want to take this N95 mask, just opened it, just place it over her face like that, hold strong. I'll use my little finger, hold strong. You are trying, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now if I bring it out here, strong, strong. But when you actually touch, see, she can breathe beside it, not around it. It's not obstructing her breathing or anything, it's just, it's blocking her autonomic regulation. So that's another benefit of wearing a mask, is it weakens, it probably turns off your mitochondrial function and weakens it. I could check any muscle in the body and it'll make it weak. So thanks for watching.
Yeah, anything over the mouth. Hand.
Your own hand, you don't even have to touch. Just, you could have it a couple inches away and it'll make a previously strong muscle group go weak. Any muscle group that you test, and it has a global effect on the body. So wearing one of these masks is weakening your body, probably turning off the mitochondrial function or down-regulating it markedly. And that's going to weaken your immune function and everything, make you more susceptible to this, wearing this petri dish right over your face. It's insane.
Restricting your breathing, making it hard to get more oxygen, raising your blood pressures. Yeah, so many things.
So try this with friends and family, and you can do kind of like parlor tricks, but just show people their mask. Now, a thing is, if you're testing someone in an environment that has Wi-Fi or artificial lighting,
oh, you're going to do that.
They got a cell phone in their pocket, they're going to be weak all the time, no matter if they got the mask on or not. So you have to have a neutral,
as much as possible.
Yeah, to where they are able to be strong without a mask, and then just hold it up in front of them. You don't even have to touch it to their face, right an inch away or so, and see how they weaken. It's amazing. So it's another factor that people don't realize what they're doing to themselves when they wear these masks all day.
I think it's important we just share this information. We have to teach one another about this. I mean, this is global, you know, and if we can start sharing more of this information and let people know that, you know, we're being schmoozed on a big time. You know, we've had a lot of time to bring this out, and people are seeing the inconsistencies. Again, how come you can go to a big chain store and you can't go to a little mom and pop? You know, if the virus were a real boogeyman, there would be like, no, we have nothing. You know, everybody's locked down, everything all over. It'd be consistent, but it's so many inconsistencies that it can't be. You know, even, you know, it's like we got to think a little bit, put some logic. Like, you know, this is not making sense. Even if you follow their point of view, it still doesn't make sense. So I think people are getting it. We just have to back it up with real information, give people the facts, because they're going on emotions, they're going on fear, they're parroting things that don't make sense, that it's not thought out, they're parroting talking points. So it's important to, you know, sometimes if you trigger reactions, you might have to do it in a personal way. You can say, you know, I used to think that, you know, I was in fear until I found out. And then what does somebody say? No, you're not. No, you weren't. I was like, oh, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I was in fear until I found out the truth. Can I share some things with you? You know, I mean, I get personally, and I know Bobby does, gets really frustrated, and then you just get, you know, mad. And he's like, I don't care. You know, rather than like, all right, we got to just take a step back and give somebody some information, you know, because we're steeped in this. People that are watching this, we have a lot, you know, we've been listening and paying attention to these things for years. And there's people that just woke up, or if you even want to call it that. So it's just like throwing cold coffee on them, you know.
So what I like to do when somebody says, you're supposed to be wearing a mask, or you're not wearing a mask, I say, well, if you could pretend that a mask will protect you, then you can pretend that I'm wearing one. Or
and show them your shirt. Let me see the shirt, and it'll make more sense. Contains facts and opinions some may find offensive. All right, enough said.
So also, like if somebody says you're supposed to be wearing a mask, say, well, I'm supposed to be wearing underwear too. And they don't know what to say. It's funny. So it's so insane that we're dealing with all this, but that's where the awareness of the masses are, and they're so easily manipulated because they're
and then also
being programmed by watching TV.
Right.
That's why they call it television programming.
And one other thing that I can share, I was talking to some patient about, you know, mask wearing, and she got really, really defensive and kind of nasty with me. And I said, you know, if I wasn't thinking outside the box, then I wouldn't have found your problem, and you would still have that itchy, bleeding skin that you aren't getting anywhere with.
Or those
Shut up.
Mouthful of mercury fillings.
You know, I mean, it's like, you know, if I were thinking outside the box to find root canals, dead teeth, mercury filling, disease thing, you know, in your body that was the cause of your symptoms, then you would still be suffering. So, you know, so that you're paying me to think outside the box, you know, and to investigate this. So, you know, you people that aren't in this, you can say, look, I have healthcare practitioners, people I know that have gotten people well. And, you know, if they didn't think outside the box, or if people like them, I'm not saying we're all exclusive, but if people like us didn't think outside the box and investigate, you know, we would still be going round and round about these simple little problems that people have. So I know all of you know that and know people that know that, but this is what we have to share with one another with this think, and help people see it a little bit more from our point of view. So I hope it's given you some ideas and a little bit more thinking outside the box. You know, it's like we have to kind of, you know, resist that official narrative unless it makes sense. But if it doesn't make sense, we have to keep going and finding the information until it does.
And remember, the real doctor is within. Only your body can heal itself. And it does it every moment of every day.
That's right. All right. Everybody heal well. Spread the news.
Namaste.
Namaste. Bye.